you want to do the intro?
No, you do it, no.
Alright.
Everyone's expecting it.
And it's Tuesday night. I got my laptop on, and I feel alright. I got a church road, and my lunch is made. Got my headphones on, and I close the door. Don't disturb me. It's time to stand up tall and say some things about the shitty world we're living in with the boys at Raconteurs News. Raconteurs.
I've just been asked to share a link.
Raconteurs News, Raconteurs News, Raconteurs News, Raconteurs News, Raconteurs News. Oh yeah.
Good evening and welcome to Raconteurs News. It's Tuesday night, it's come round again. I hope you've all had a fabulous weekend, because I certainly have. We went over this weekend and met Jason and his partner at the coast and had some fun, didn't we, Jace?
Yeah, we did. Yeah, we had quite a jolly time. I think I can't really remember very much of it, but
well, that's usually the way when we're having fun.
Fun was had by I think fun was had by me anyway. I don't know about anybody else. Usually, when I'm having fun, the people around me aren't.
No, I think we all had a great deal of fun. It was a shame about the weather, but there's a bit of an X-Files thing going on here, because it rained heavily from the moment we got there to pretty much just before we came home. And when I got home, I realised I got sunburnt. How's that work? I'd got a mark on my neck where my shirt come to, and I thought, that's a bit weird. But anyway, tonight we were billed having Lenon Honor joining us to talk about his new film, but I don't know what's happened. Lenon doesn't appear to be showing up at the minute, so let's hope he might join us as the show goes on. Drop
him an email and see what.
Yeah, that'd be really cool, Jason, if you could do that. But we've got plenty to talk about. There's lots been happening in the world, and the one thing that I know very little about, because I've been out all day today and I wasn't on the PC late last night, is the tragic events that have happened in Manchester. And our hearts go out to anyone who's lost anyone there. It appears that there's, I believe the last count, 23 children have been murdered in this terrible incident. I don't know much more about it. I know there's a lot of people screaming false flag all over the social media, but for me, I haven't had a chance to look at it, so I really can't pass any comment on it. What have you seen so far, Jace?
Well, I've seen just about what everyone else has seen. There's certain stories going around about it was a balloon that went off or something like that, or I really don't know. I've seen the news. I've seen the news, and I've seen how they are spinning it. How it's complete. I mean, this morning all the regular TV stuff was cancelled, and it was a new special, which I don't think we've seen one of them. I don't think I've seen a new special since Diana died. I mean, they don't normally do them these days, especially in these days of rolling news we get on the news channel. So everybody, of course, is upset, and rightly so as well. Well, I know as much as you. I'm trying to protect myself from it. I don't want it to appear relevant to me, because it certainly isn't relevant to me. Obviously, anybody who's involved, it's relevant to them. But we seem to be getting dragged into this, where as usual, I nearly said sheep. and I shouldn't really, but
No.
People are posting things on Facebook, and there's different people, even money. I mean, they're even starting to raise money. I don't get it. Why do you need money? Oh, okay, the victims' families do.
Yeah.
But it just seems that it's invading every part of our lives. It's traumatizing people, and I was hoping to get Lenon's take on it, because he does some good work on he calls them morbid death rituals that are there just to traumatize people, right, and embed that trauma in the subconscious. So perhaps if we get him on a little bit later on, I've just sent him an email, but he'll be able to give us some idea of what it's like over there, what sort of coverage it's getting over there, and how to protect yourself from all this. I mean, it's pretty simple to say turn the TV off, but people want to know, people want information, don't they? And it's just, it just seems that any time there's something like this that happens, more and more people are being dragged into it who are not. It's got absolutely nothing to do. It's got nothing to do with me. It's not relevant to me at all.
Yeah.
And yet, finding myself with this blanket coverage of this incident. Let's face it, there's not been an investigation, so nobody really knows what's happened. All the stuff usually all the early reports usually sort of get lost, especially if they contradict what they're trying to tell us has happened afterwards. So it's interesting. It's obviously terrible that people have lost their lives. But like I say, again, people need to get a bit of perspective and realise that to 99% of people, the incident is not relevant at all.
It appears Lenon's just showed up.
Oh, good.
Yeah, so I'll try and add into the call if I can remember how to do that. Full screen. There we go. Add people to this call. There we go. There we go. Yeah, it'd be interesting to see what Lenon's take on it. I mean, normally I've usually had a look at these things, although with the terrorist incidents I have I kind of backed off from them a little bit, because it appears it's the same script over and over again. And it does seem a bit pointless looking at after a while, because it's just more of the same, isn't it? I mean, an interesting...
Yeah, I didn't...
An interesting note I've just seen there is a list of some recent attacks. Lee Rigby, 22nd of the 5th, 2013. Brussels attack, 22nd of the 3rd, 2016. Munich attack, 22nd of the 7th, 2016. London, 22nd of the 3rd, 17. Manchester, 22nd of the 5th. And then there's 22nd of the 7th, question mark. Does seem, they do seem to like this particular date, don't they? For whatever they're doing.
Yeah. It's weird, isn't it, that terrorists choose certain dates. Mm-hmm. I did hear the usual early report that they found some ID of the person that had committed this atrocity. They found ID at the scene. So again, it's the same MO, it's the same modus operandi, and they just seem to be running out of ideas completely. They just completely run out of ideas. It's the same script every single time. So who knows? I suppose it'll all come out in the wash. And I know that there's people on social media that are claiming this is a false flag attack. Is it or not? We don't know. All we can do is just keep an eye on them and what they're doing and what they're saying as well, because it may turn out that this is a real terrorist attack, or it might turn out that it's a false flag attack. You never know.
Okay, yep. Lennon's just going for a reboot, so it appears he's not able to join this at the minute. So he'll be back with us shortly. But it's all much of a muchness, isn't it? It's quite, I mean, it's gone to a whole new level, hasn't it? Attacking children, for me.
Yeah, of course it has. Yeah, of course it has, and more shame on whoever's doing it, because whether it's government, it's a government operation, a black op, or it's a shadow government operation, or even something that the services, the armed forces, have put together. Well, it's shameful that they're now targeting children. It seems that there's nothing sacred amongst these people that are committing these offences, these acts, atrocities, whoever they are. To go after children, it's taking it up a level. It's taking it up a notch, and it's something that really needs to be investigated.
Also, I do know that there will be people out there who are thinking, for Christ's sake, have some respect. There are children that have died. And as we were saying just before we came on in there, a good friend of ours recently was faced with that statement, and he said, well, okay, for argument's sake, I'm walking down the street one night and I see an elderly lady across the road, and this guy goes up, mugs her for a purse, beats the living daylights out of her, and she dies later in hospital. So what do? Do you tell the police the description of the man who you saw attacking her, or do you just keep quiet for the sake of respect?
Yeah, people react emotionally to these things, and because it's got children in it as well, it's got children involved. It's understandable people react emotionally, but really what we should do is we should give a critical look at what we're being told and see whether it stacks up or not. That's pretty much all I'd say to anybody is don't just get caught up in this emotional response to something that you perceive to be, in some way relevant to you, because everyone's got kids. A lot of people have got kids, and they think about what would happen if their own kids were there. So I don't know. It's a whole mess, and whoever's behind it. Then whoever's behind it really should be ashamed of themselves, because this time it's gone a little bit too far at its children, and they're attacking concerts and things like that.
Well, I'm just looking at the comments we've got in the chat room so far, and there's Freeman Jack is saying suicide bomber, so no need for a trial, all nice and tidy. Sturm is saying it's a hoax in his opinion. No evidence of a bomb, no terrorism footage, evidence of fatalities names. So I'm not quite sure what he means by that, but it looks certainly starting to look dodgy from what I'm hearing, but I'll wait and make judgment when I've seen it for myself.
That's the problem, though, isn't it? I mean, you're not going to see it for yourself, are you? What you're going to do is you're going to see conflicting reports from different people. Everything will be, will get sort of, in the fog of war, everything will get sort of clouded. There'll be early reporting that is going to then afterwards going to be retracted, such as probably the where they said that they got his ID and everything like that. And I think there's been some arrests as well in Manchester over the last few hours of people that are supposed to be involved in some way, and I know that there's claims that ISIS have claimed responsibility for what's happened. Again, but where are ISIS tweeting from? Because ISIS last time they were tweeting from somewhere in London, weren't they? On David Cameron Street or something daft.
Yes, I believe so. Yeah, it was quite interesting when that account was traced. Yeah. Oh, Manchester suicide bomber named by the police, apparently.
Yeah, there you go. I mean, it's ridiculous. It is ridiculous. Why don't they, instead of saying, look, let's not say anything, let's not do anything until we've got all the evidence in together, and we've got a picture of what's going on. They're just leaking things to the public, and it's making the public more and more on edge. I noticed that there was lots of different places that said that there was a gunman in hospitals and things like that, and they'd had to put I think it was an Oldham hospital on lockdown or something like that. But when you get the fog of war like this, the first casualty is the truth.
Hello?
I think.
Hey, we've got Lenon with us. Hi, Lenon. Welcome back to Raconteurs News.
Hey, how's it going?
We're pretty good.
It's going pretty good. We were just discussing what's happened over in Manchester. I don't know if you've seen that, Lenon.
Yeah, I have.
It's your thoughts.
I was just going to ask you, because what's the coverage like over there in the States? Because here it's blanket coverage, and it's been, I use one of your phrases, the perceived relevance to everybody is in overdrive. What do you think people should look out for and avoid, so that they can protect the subconscious mind from this?
As always. Yeah, as always, try your best to avoid unnecessary fear, because one of the things that happens is that when there is full coverage and it's everywhere, it traumatizes people, and it also traumatizes people that weren't there and really have not much to do with what went on there. And out of the trauma is created a lot of fear. People become fearful, and of course, people begin to externalize power. And as long as you externalize power, you can be maintained in the state of control. So what I would suggest that people do is always to think about how relevant is it to you in your life right now. This does not mean that we diminish the value of human life, nor does this mean that we ignore these things, but to succumb to unnecessary fear is something that we have to make sure we look out for.
Yeah, I think just about word for word for what we say before, and it has been placed. It's all over the place. It's everywhere, and we can't. If we perceive it to be relevant to us, then that opens up that state of fear, doesn't it?
Yes. And on one hand, I think we should be aware of it. We should be aware of as many things as possible, but then we have to ask the question: how relevant is it to our own personal life? And much of what is promoted in media, much of which is fear-based, is completely irrelevant to a person's individual life. And then the only reason why it becomes relevant is because a person begins to perceive it as being relevant. And that perception is precisely what happens when media continues to bombard the population with the same type of story, especially traumatizing story. And this has been going on for a long time. And especially, I have to add, when it comes to issues like terrorism, the frequency at which it occurs is minimal, but when it does occur, at least in the quote unquote Western world, it's minimal. But when it does occur, it's reported on to such a degree that it becomes so blown out of proportion, and that is a serious problem as well. And this has been going on for a long time, especially since September 11, 2001.
Yeah. As you outline in your book, the 911 Fear-Based Mind Control Program, which I've got a copy of. In fact, I need to find out where it is, because I've lent it to somebody and I can't remember who. So anyway, we best get you introduced, don't we, really? This is Lenon Honor. He's a writer, musician, video producer, talk show host, counsellor. You've got your own website, lenonhonor.com. You've got a huge body of work on there. I discovered your work around about 2012 or 2013. But we've got you on tonight to talk about your new documentary. It's called Beyond Gangster Blackface, a critical analysis of gangster rap, and it primarily focuses on NWA. I've watched it today. I've watched it this afternoon. And some great people on there, some great guests you've got on there. What made you pick NWA, and why this particular subject?
Yes. Well, to answer the first question, why did I pick NWA? That came out of the fact that there was a Hollywood production biopic film that was produced about 2 years ago, and for NWA, and they titled it Straight Outta Compton. And that was interesting to me, that a film like this would be produced for them, because once I heard that it was being produced, I asked myself, out of all of the hip hop groups or rap groups that are out there, why would they focus on this group? Because in my mind, when I reflected back to my childhood, I remember that NWA had a very negative impact on me, also a lot of my friends, and a negative impact on the African American community. What they talked about in their lyrics, the language that they used in their lyrics, the extreme degrees of disrespect towards women and misogyny, the promotion of sexual promiscuity, the promotion of gang culture. I can go on and on. I reflected back on that. I thought that that was interesting, and I also thought that that was going to be problematic because I figured in my mind, critically thinking, that if this film was going to be produced, it's probably going to be produced in such a way that it paints NWA in a positive light. And that also means that the next generation who goes to view that film, they will also be indoctrinated into the notion that they should go and begin to listen to NWA's music. And that would be problematic because I remember that music had a negative impact on me. I'm sure that it will and has had a negative impact on anyone else who has listened to it long enough. And if you got have a whole new generation that is not equipped with critical thinking, most of which are young, they too will be indoctrinated into that paradigm, that programming that was presented within NWA, which is mainly rooted in misogyny, gang culture, and pimp culture. So that's why I decided to focus on NWA, because that film came out, and I decided to do the film simply to offer intellectual tools for people to begin to think critically about the lyrics that they are listening to, and then they can use that same skill set of critical thinking and apply it to any other form of media. In fact, it's no different than if we look at the terrorism propaganda that always comes up within the 6 weeks leading up to September 11th. The same critical thinking skills can be applied to that. To think critically about what we are consuming and asking critical questions as to whether or not it is in our best interest to be listening to that. So ultimately, in the end, I hope to have produced a documentary, a film that will provide parents and children with the intellectual tools that they will need to protect their subconscious mind from negative media programming, whether that be gangster rap, whether that be terrorism propaganda, whether that be sexism propaganda, race-based mind control, fear-based mind control, what have you, that to have the intellectual tools needed to protect their subconscious mind is the key.
Absolutely. And then I want to sort of get to the root of why you think this is important, and do you think that it has a bigger impact on the African American community, or do you think that because there's a lot of white kids listen to rap, hip hop and things like that, so it's not just NWA on their own, it's actually hip hop and the culture that is based in hip hop, yeah? Do you think that it's specifically targeted at African American kids, teenagers?
Yes, well, the thing is that the target is the stories that are told often come out of the African American community. I'm saying that the stories that are told by African American rappers are usually stories that are told or are experienced within the African American community. But the thing is that hip hop artists or rap artists, they do not become mainstream or popular, or they don't go platinum, as it were. They don't reach high levels of financial success, fame, unless the larger society begins to support and purchase the music. So this is to say that the reason why NWA became popular was not because of African Americans, and the reason why NWA had financial success was not because of African Americans. In fact, during that time period, the manner in which, within the African American community during that time period, the manner in which music circulated was through bootlegging. We would, if a song was played on the radio, we would record it on our tape deck, and then people would dub that tape, and then it would pass around throughout the community because in many African American communities, the disposable income was not there to be able to purchase music. And then once music began to be put on CDs, CDs were expensive, but then also CD players were very expensive during that time period. And so what ended up happening was that the people who have the most disposable income, which in the United States of America happened to be mainly white folk, the younger white males in particular began to consume the music simply not just because they had the money to do it, but because it was promoted as being popular, and it was promoted as being the in thing to do. So this is all to say that NWA's lyrics were not necessarily targeted towards African Americans, in point of fact that the main consumers of NWA's music happens to be young white males. And this is traditionally with hip hop. Any hip hop artist, if they have high levels of financial success, it's not because the African American community supports them, because the African American community, obviously here in the United States of America, it's a very small segment, a fraction of the overall population. So once the overall or the greater population of people who consume music here in the United States of America, once they begin to purchase NWA, NWA's music, now NWA begins to experience higher levels of financial success, so forth and so on. And this is traditionally the case with hip hop in general and gangster rap in particular.
Yeah, I always make the point that we get back, but go back to the 60s, and you've got sort of Beatles talking about wanting to hold hands and things like that, and then we get to around about the 80s, 90s, and it's suddenly changed. But yet, people will say that the way that, particularly the women are perceived in music, they'll say that women in the media have got perceived better these days than they were back in the day. Now, to me, that doesn't make any sense. I mean, the misogyny of it all is huge, isn't it? I was quite shocked about some of the lyrics. I wasn't a big NWA fan. In fact, I don't think I've ever heard one of their records. But I was a little bit shocked with some of the lyrics that they were using and how misogynistic and violent they were.
Yes, and the thing was that in the film, I didn't even deal with the most egregious forms of their lyrics, because in fact, not only did they promote sexism, misogyny, the disrespect of women, the murder of other African American males and females, but they also promoted rape culture. I didn't even touch on that inside the film, because the lyrics themselves and what they say in the lyrics, I felt like they were so far over the top that it was almost like too much. It was too much to include inside of the film. The notion that somehow women are not being portrayed, are being portrayed in a better light these days, compared to in past decades, that's an illusion. In fact, there's been a steady pushing of the envelope in terms of the over-sexualization of women. Because I even thought what came to mind just now was someone like Madonna. I remember when Madonna came onto the scene, she was extremely controversial, very controversial. Not just because of some of the lyrics, and not all of her lyrics, but some of her lyrics were a bit uncomfortable for a lot of people to hear. But also the manner in which she dressed caused a lot of people to have concerns. But then when you look at what we find in media now in the entertainment industry in terms of the projection of women, and now it's hypersexuality, there's no comparison. People like Katy Perry, people like Lady Gaga, the manner in which they portrayed themselves and the manner in which they dress and the over-sexualization, when you compare that, nowadays, and even some more modern female artists, you compare what they're doing nowadays to someone like Madonna, you can see that there is a huge difference. There is a huge difference. In other words, there's been a slow degradation that has taken place in terms of how women are portrayed in mass media, and the over-sexualization of women in mass media. And in particular, gangster rap had a lot to do with that. A lot to do with that.
Mm. What I wanted to ask you, you had a good number of guests on there. Would you mind telling us, because I wasn't quite familiar with many of your guests, so could you sort of give some background on the guests that you had on, and what part they play in life, what part they play in music and things?
Yes. So initially, when I decided to do this film, in my mind, the initial conceptualization was that I would be the only one in the film. I thought that I would, and I thought that it would take about 6 months, and it was basically going to be statistical analysis of NWA. And what I did in terms of that portion or that segment of the documentary was that I researched NWA, and I began to look at their 4 albums of music, and I went track by track, song by song, album by album, and I began to calculate the words and phrases that were being used the most. And based upon what was being repeated, that's where you get to the programming. Anything that is repeated over and over again, now you're dealing with programming. In mass media, terror threats, as they're being reported over and over again, you get the repetition. Well, that's the programming. That's the major theme that is being presented in the news. Well, the same thing applies to music. So I began to calculate what were the major themes. Also began to calculate per minute averages for each song, for each album, and then for 2 albums, 3 albums, 4 albums, so forth. It was a very meticulous process. It took quite a bit of time, about 6 months altogether. In addition, I did research. But what happened was that as I began to conceptualize the production phase outside of the research, it became apparent to me that it was going to be necessary for me to begin to include interview guests, just so they can share their perspective as well. And it provides more information, but also more production value. So initially, I decided to on 5 male interview guests, which ultimately expanded to 6. At a certain point, I realized that the female perspective was going to be important. So then I incorporated. I wanted to have 6 and 6, but I think we ended up having 7 and 5. And I took, and specifically, I took people who have different backgrounds. As an example, one of the individuals in the film, Alonzo Williams, he was important. And initially, I didn't think he was going to participate. I thought that if I asked him, he was going to say no. But he was kind enough to agree to participate in the film. He is actually one of the founders of West Coast hip hop. And his group was the World Class Wrecking Crew. And his group actually had Dr. Dre in the group prior to NWA being started. Also, DJ Yella was in his group prior to NWA being started. Alonzo Williams helped Eazy-E and taught Eazy-E about the entertainment business, and in particular about how to start his own label, so forth and so on. The individual who managed NWA, Jerry Heller, Alonzo Williams introduced Eazy-E to Jerry Heller. So there's this long history, and a lot of people don't realize this, but in West Coast hip hop did not start with gangster rap. West Coast hip hop actually started with groups like the World Class Wrecking Crew. So what happens in the film is Alonzo Williams shares some very interesting perspectives based on historical facts, because he lived through that time and he was there on ground level when things were taking place and when NWA was formed. He also saw how NWA's music impacted his community, meaning in Compton, California, and how it changed the manner in which people dressed. It changed behavior patterns. He also talked about, and we didn't include this in the film, but he also owned a club, and it was a teenage club, and people would come to the club. And he says that one of the things that happened was, because of the promotion of gang culture, not only did it change how people dress, but it also impacted behavior. And he said at a certain point, it became very difficult for him to be able to have proper security in order to maintain peace within his establishment. And he said that wasn't the case before. But he said that the promotion of gang culture and then the proliferation of gangs in that community really began to transform people's behavior, even at his facility or his nightclub. So he was specifically selected as someone who was there and witnessed the transformation of West Coast hip hop from being mainly a dance party music, transforming itself into a more street-oriented music that promoted things like misogyny, gang culture, the disrespect of women, so forth and so on. Other interview guests, of course, my wife is in the film. I wanted to have her in the film because she gives an interesting perspective in terms of growing up without a father. In the film, we just don't deal with NWA. We deal with family issues, male-female relationships. We deal with absentee fathers, pregnancy, absentee mothers for that matter. We deal with drug addiction. There's many different topics that we address inside the film. So I wanted to make sure that we had a large sample size, if you will, of people who actually have different backgrounds. Other people, Siddiqui Bakari is inside of the film. I chose him because he knows a lot about hip hop. He's a hip hop fan, and he gives very interesting perspectives on hip hop. He's written books on the topic, so forth and so on. We also had Luke Ellington. He grew up in Compton, California. A Conundrum, she grew up in Compton, California. They grew up during the time period when NWA was popular, so they had some very interesting perspectives. Also, they shared some of their personal backgrounds growing up in Los Angeles during that time. So in other words, we 12 altogether, but the idea was that I wanted to have a good mixture of people from different backgrounds. And when they share their stories, I in my mind, I figured that once they begin to share their story, because they're so diverse, that there will be people from different backgrounds who will be able to find someone that they can relate to. And it was important to have individuals who are relatable. Sorry, I don't know did I answer the question?
Yeah, well, I think in there, yeah. I wanted to ask you: do you think that it's conscious? It's a conscious decision that's been made. Do you think that this was steered in this sort of direction, or do you think it's just the way that it's grown organically?
You mean gangster rap?
Gangster rap, yeah. Sorry, yeah. Gangster rap, the violence, because it didn't used to be like that. I remember Will Smith, doing his happy rapping sort of thing, and then it just suddenly seemed to change.
Yes. Well, the thing is that it was always there. In fact, NWA, they didn't start gangster rap. You can look at Schoolie D on the East Coast. You can look at Ice-T. He actually had tracks out that were we would classify as being gangster rap prior to NWA coming onto the scene, or at least getting popular. Also, Boogie Down Productions with KRS-One, their first album, I believe it was their first album, Criminal Minded. That was actually gangster rap. So it was around. It was around prior to NWA coming on the scene. But I think that what happened was NWA they took it to an extreme, and that extreme oftentimes gets the most amount of attention. And oftentimes too, corporations, they see the extremities at times. They will see that as a wonderful way, and it's like automatic promotion. That if you do something that has shock value, then you're gonna gain or garner more attention. The more attention you gain, the more likely it is that you'll be able to turn that into a revenue stream. You turn people's attention into a revenue stream. So, but what I think happened was that the music itself, or the lyrics themselves, were so over the top, and were pushing the envelope to such an extreme degree, and the success that came out of that because of the shock value, that the entertainment industry saw that this particular genre or subgenre of hip hop, meaning gangster rap, was not only marketable but extremely profitable. Then you begin to see the push for more artists to come out to talk to use the same type of orientation in terms of writing their lyrics. That it has to be gang culture affiliation type of lyrics. It has to be about death and destruction. It has to be about violence. It has to be about what I call ghetto centrism. But prior to that, the entertainment industry wasn't really dealing with that. But once NWA came onto the scene and they had levels of success, it transformed the manner in which the entertainment industry or the music industry began to operate when it came to hip hop. Whereas there were nice songs that were out there that were more dance oriented. Now it wasn't so much about dance oriented. It was about telling stories that were rooted in gang culture and hood culture. And there's not anything necessarily wrong with that. But once that becomes the primary imagery or the primary programming that is pushed, then we have to ask critical questions in terms of how is it going to impact not only the African American community, in terms of young African American males and their self-identity, because a lot of young African American males begin to self-identify with these gangster archetypes that were being presented in the lyrics. But also, how does that change the perceptions of the greater or the larger society, meaning white society, and their perceptions of African Americans? And I don't think that was considered, the damage that it caused and that it would cause and that it continues to cause in terms of gangster rap. So this ought to say that, no, I don't think that initially that it was something that was created in a vacuum for the purposes of social engineering. No, I don't think that. I think that what happened was that it was something that was created, that it was genuinely created, but then the more shock value that it caused and the more money that it began to generate, it began to become more and more extreme. And then once the entertainment industry or the music industry solved the profitability factor, then the entertainment industry or the music industry began to look for and to begin to promote more artists who were putting forth the same type of programming and mind control programming, in essence, that NWA was putting forth.
Okay, Lenon, if I can just jump in here, I've been sitting back a little bit quiet and subdued because gangster rap and hip hop is really something that's completely off my radar. So a lot of what you're talking about, unfortunately, I haven't been able to get a chance to look at the film now before the interview, but I've noticed the similarity with something that's been kind of bothering me for a while, and that's I'm not a TV watcher, but I do go to people's houses and they have the TV on and I see that. And something I've noticed when I watch TV, and it's particularly prominent in children's TV and advertising, a lot of advertising, as we know, is aimed at children, and it's almost the reverse of the denigrating women in the gangster rap and sexualizing women. It's the there's one phrase in particular that's used on a particularly odious children's program called Peppa Pig, and it's the silly daddy. It's always silly daddy. You see an advertisement for anything, and there's some kind of muck up, some kind of cock up. It's always daddy's fault. Silly daddy, stupid daddy. Oh, it's daddy's fault. And I just think, is this part of the same agenda that's been rolled out towards us and perpetrated on our youth?
Is it the same? Well, in terms of the agenda to push forward gangster rap, I wouldn't say that it's the same agenda, but in terms of the overall effect, because, and I understand what you're saying, because what came to mind as you talked about Peppa Pig was here in the United States, one of it's probably the most popular cartoon series ever, and most definitely the most successful cartoon series ever, is a show called The Simpsons.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And The Simpsons, I think it's a family of 5 or 6, something to that. I think there's a dog, might be a cat too. But anyway, one of the main characters is I can't remember his name. The father, I can't remember his name. Yeah, Homer Simpson. And the manner in which he conducts himself, it's as if he is an imbecile. He has very little intellectual process. He doesn't function as an adult per se. No. He's confused a lot of the time. And a lot of us, we pass that off as, okay, it's just humor. But then again, if you have that type of an archetype for manhood and fatherhood, and it's being promoted over the course of a decade, and I think Simpsons been around as probably 15, 20 years by now, it will have an effect. It have an effect on what people will perceive to be a reasonable representation, even if it is funny, a reasonable representation of manhood, fatherhood, etc. So I think the same thing applies to what you're speaking about with Peppa Pig, that the same principle applies, that if the father is always called silly, is there any room for him to be perceived as being anything more than that? Now, again, some people may argue, well, it's just a cartoon and it's supposed to be funny. Yeah, but there's still an archetype for manhood and fatherhood that's being presented and misrepresented. And so to draw the correlation back to gangster rap, well, the same thing applies. This is where there is a correlation, and that is to say that the archetype for manhood and definitely the archetype for fatherhood that was being promoted within NWA in their lyrics was definitely not a good representation or a good archetype for young African-American males to follow. I think there's also another difference that we have to make clear of, and that is, or make clear, and that is to say that because it is a cartoon, the likely, and in particular Peppa Pig, these are pigs, it's less likely that a child is going to self-identify with those pigs, because they not only do they see it as a cartoon, but they also see it as non-human beings. They say, okay, these are pigs, these are not human beings. So there's a separation that occurs. I'm just talking about psychologically here, that there's a separation that will occur, although there are children that may begin to self-identify because they don't necessarily perceive these animals to be anything other than human beings. They may perceive the animals to be human beings themselves. They're talking, they're walking just like human beings. The difference, though, however, is that with NWA, there is a significant percentage of African-American, young African-American males who begin to self-identify with these archetypes that were being presented in terms of manhood and fatherhood. In fact, I will propose that the high degree and high rate of absentee fatherism creates this dynamic when there are a lot of African-American males. They're simply trying to find someone to identify with. And under normal circumstances, the person that they identify with the most should be their father, assuming that their father is functioning as an honorable man, as a dedicated husband and father, that he's a good archetype, a role model to follow. That ideally you would want that to happen. With my sons, that's precisely what's happening. I have to make sure that I conduct myself in a respectful way because I know that they're watching me. I have to make sure that I treat my wife with respect because I know that they're watching me. I have to make sure that I treat them with respect because they're watching me. Mm-hmm. So for young African-American males who don't have that father figure, they don't have that archetype to look towards, and it's absent, they still have to find someone to self-identify. What does it mean to be a man? What does it mean to be a husband? What does it mean to be a father? All of us, we go through this. So then if you have these gangster archetypes that are being presented, you have males who are promoting sexual promiscuity. You have males who are promoting in their lyrics, NWA in their lyrics. They're promoting a gang culture and physical violence against other African Americans. They're promoting rape culture. Okay, now we have a serious problem because there are going to be some young African American males who will begin to self-identify with these archetypes that are being presented. And the thing is this, that it's not that everyone does, but there is an influence over time. And I would propose that also there have been young white males who have self-identified with some of these archetypes, because the repetition is key. If it's being repeated over and over again, whether that is through The Simpsons, whether that is through NWA's lyrics, or whether that is being through Peppa Pig, to various degrees, it's going to have some sort of an impact. So this ought to say that, yes, I would say that there has been an agenda that has been put forth. And I, in my mind, I look at it as an agenda to destabilize the family unit, male-female relationships, by presenting degraded versions of men, degraded versions of women, and also degraded versions of mothers and fathers, and how mothers should treat their children and how fathers should treat their children. I think that is part of the agenda, the destabilization of the family unit.
Yeah, well, we've seen that everywhere, haven't we? There is a destabilization. You get TV shows on where there's just conflict between males and females. It seems to me that the stable family unit, such as you've got yourself, I know you've got 5 children, and you've got your lovely wife Aida, and you've got 5 children as well. And you're one of the few people that promotes positivity and treating your wife well, and you, I suppose you get what you get back what you put out there.
No, absolutely. And see, that's the thing. That's why it was important for me to do the critical analysis of NWA, because I remember the impact that it had on me in terms of how I saw women when I was growing up. In fact, I really wish I'm just thinking about it now. I wish I had said this in the film. I didn't start calling women bitches and hoes until after I started listening to NWA. So the transformation of my language, I remember, and I have this tape somewhere. It may be in some box somewhere in my mother's, storage unit or something. But I have that. We did this recording session as a musician, and I had a band, and we did this recording session, and we were recording a song. And in the break between the first song and the second song, we started to joke around. And the engineer, he says, "Okay, I know you guys have things to do, and so let's try and get the second track recorded." And I said, "Yeah, I have things to do. I have bitches and hoes to go see." See, I would have never said anything like that prior to listening to NWA, and it wasn't even true. It wasn't like I had quote unquote bitches and hoes to see. You see, but I had received the programming. That programming is there in gangster rap, and I listened to NWA so much that it began to change the manner in which I spoke. And the thing is that I didn't even believe in that. It wasn't like I lived a life where I was disrespecting women. It wasn't like that at all. But the programming was so deep that it changed my language, and at the very least, it began to influence how I spoke about women. So this ought to say that over time, it's really taken me a lot of time to get to a point where I could refine myself as a young man and coming into manhood, and now being a father of 5 children, to where I can operate in a respectful way as it relates to my family. And see, if back then, if I hadn't taken the time to refine myself and to work on the programming and to get beyond the programming, there's no way that I would have the level of respect that I have for my wife or for women in general. But then also, there's no way that I'll be able to function as a dedicated father either. So this ought to say that we have to be very careful. That's why the critical thinking skills is important. We have to be able to teach our children these critical thinking skills. That's what the documentary is ultimately designed to do, so that when they are exposed to this type of program, and trust me, they will be exposed to it. It's all over the place. If it's in Peppa Pig to a certain degree, if it's in The Simpsons to an extreme degree, if it's part of hip hop culture, and in particular the subgenre of gangster rap, then you best believe that people are going to be exposed to it. Your children are going to be exposed to it. So that's why it's important to have the intellectual tools needed to protect the subconscious mind, because if the subconscious mind is not protected, then we begin to talk with that talk and using that language, the bitches and hoes. And in some cases, it begins to transform itself into behavior. See, it always goes from your mental state, how you think about things begins to change. How you speak about things begin to change. How you feel about things begin to change. And ultimately, how your behavior begins to change. Now, in some cases, it doesn't happen for everyone. It doesn't get to that behavior level. But in a lot of cases, it does happen to that point wherein it begins to impact behavior levels. And I will tell you that I knew of young African-American males whose ultimately their behavior began to transform because of the program that they received in gangster rap. They grew up in 2-parent households. Their mother and father had wonderful jobs. They lived in a beautiful home. The lawn was always cut nice. They were in middle-class neighborhood. And yet when they began to hear the lyrics of NWA, not just NWA, but just hip-hop lyrics in general, Now they begin to think that they have to be something other than what they really were. And now all of a sudden they're these pseudo gangsters. How is that possible? You know, how is it that all of a sudden, well, that's what we call gangster blackface. And I saw it with my own eyes. And that's precisely why, as a last point, when I heard about NWA putting together this film biopic, I said, well, you know, I think I should do a critical analysis of this, because there will be another generation who will be exposed to NWA's music because of the film. And the film was wildly popular, wildly popular. And because they're being exposed to the film, they're going to take away a positive view of NWA and NWA's lyrics. And then they're going to, as a consequence, they're going to go back and listen to NWA's lyrics. And then now they're going to receive the same programming that I received. Let me say one other thing. This was about a week and a half ago, maybe 2 weeks ago. I'm outside, and we live in a predominantly white community. It's a poor white community. So we've seen a lot here. We're going to be moving to Utah in about 6 weeks, and we're looking forward to that. But there was a young white male. He might have been 14, 15, maybe 16. I think 14 or 15. And he's walking down the street, and I hear this music, and I identify it right away. And I say, what's going on here? And I look over, and he's listening to NWA. And I'm thinking to myself, here we are, 25 years later. And you see, this would not have happened if the film hadn't come out, because most of the generation that came after me, like my son's age, they weren't raised on NWA. We were actually raised, when we were coming up, we actually were raised on NWA. We grew up during the time period where they came onto the scene. How is it possible that the next generation, a new generation, is being exposed to the music and is listening to it? It's not because their parents said, come and listen to this, because most parents in their right mind wouldn't want their children listening to that music. It's because the film came out, and the film indoctrinated a new generation and encouraged them to go back and listen to NWA's music.
Well, if you're just joining us tonight on Raconteurs News, we are speaking with Lenon Honor. He's telling us all about his new documentary, which is Beyond Gangster Blackface, a critical analysis of gangster rap. It mostly centres on NWA. I'm not going to say what NWA stands for, because I don't feel like I have the right to do that. But,
no, you can do it if you like. It doesn't make me. And that's the thing. Let me just say this. I did a lecture for the film in Philadelphia at the Free Your Mind conference. And one of the first things I did, and mainly predominantly white audience, and the first thing I did was I said, I want everyone to know that we will be talking about NWA. Does anyone know what NWA stands for? And no one wanted to say. Yeah. I think one person shouted out in with attitudes. And I said, well, what does that mean? No one wanted to say. And I said, no, I want everyone to say it. It's okay. I understand the racial dynamics. I know it makes people uncomfortable. So everyone repeat after me. And I go, niggas with attitudes. And everyone repeats, niggas with attitudes. I go, now don't we feel a lot better now? You see, and everyone began to laugh. But the point is that it released a certain pressure off of people that felt uncomfortable about it. But I think that if we're going to be willing to use it as African Americans, then if we're going to engage in critical analysis as to the term or as to the group that used the term, then we should have enough intellectual process, and we should be comfortable enough, intellectually speaking, to call it for what it is. So no, by all means, the documentary is Beyond Gangster Blackface, a critical analysis of gangster rap, and we do a critique and a critical analysis of niggas with attitudes.
Well, there you go. You've said it.
Yeah, and you saved us saying it. Thanks for that, Lenon.
Oh dear, us white people, we get all, finicky.
I understand. Yeah, I understand. And I should say that I don't take offense to when African Americans say it, and I don't take offense to when white people say it either. It's not a term that I use in my household, and my children don't even know the term. But the thing is that I understand that the sensitivity that people have about it, and there are white people that don't do it out of respect. I just wish that more black people wouldn't do it out of respect for themselves, But we do it so much that it's become part of our cultural norm for a lot of us here in the United States of America, and it's truly unfortunate.
Yeah, well, if anybody wants to see what Lenon thinks about the concept of race, there is on his website a YouTube video, I believe, where you did a lecture on it, and I think it was one of the most. It was one. I think I watched it live, but it was one of the most sensible things, sensible lectures that I've ever heard about race. I think you talked about your wife being from. Family being from Cape Verde, and you split down why the concept of race is absolute nonsense. So if anybody if anybody wants to see that, go on to Lenon's website, lenonhonor.com, and find that, because you really do nail it on there.
Yes, and in fact, my wife and I, we take a conscious approach to parenting. We don't even teach our children the concept of race. In other words, we don't say that there's a black race, there's a white race. It's funny because, I've been to Europe, and if you go to Europe and you say, yeah, that's a white person, most Europeans look at you like, what are you saying? And even if they say I'm European, if you ask them, if you say, yeah, you're European, most people, they're more specific. They'll say I'm French. And then you go deeper, even with, people who are from France, they have these subdivisions. So the concept of being a quote unquote race that encompasses everyone in Europe, most people in Europe don't abide to that concept. It's just here in the United States of America, the racial programming, because of the enslavement of African people here, was so great that we tend to self-identify as being of a particular race. And I'm saying we as quote unquote African Americans. African American, that's not a race. That's an ethnic group, But we do have this programming where people do say things like, yeah, I'm of the white race, I'm of the black race. And if we take this by extension, that also means that people should also, like in Asia, they should be saying, I'm of the yellow race. Now, does that make sense? Native Americans, they should be saying, I'm of the red race, because that's how it was broken down. It was not just black, white. It was black, white, yellow, red. Might as well throw green in there. It's totally ridiculous.
Yeah, completely ridiculous. But I would suggest anybody go onto your website. I mean, there's plenty of stuff on there anyway, so that to watch. I think we're getting up towards the top of the hour, so it's time that we had a little bit of a break, so you can go and get yourself a glass of water, or use the restrooms, or whatever you want to do. And I think we'll play a record, won't we? Then we'll get back and we'll carry on talking about your documentary, Beyond Gangster Blackface, a critical analysis of gangster rap. And I think we should go into some of the dynamics, how long it took you, how much research you had to do, and again, how did you finance it and that sort of thing. So we'll get into that afterwards, but I think we're going to play a record. What do you reckon, Andy?
Yeah, absolutely. I've got one here that's been rattling around in my head ever since I saw the guy a couple of weeks ago. He's very kindly given us permission to play his music. So here's one from James J. Turner. It's called Come With Me, and we'll be back in just over 4 minutes.
Well, I think I must be leaving, 'cause it's down the road I'm going. It's a rocky path I've chosen, that takes no prisoners to set you free. Oh, I'm gonna use my mind's eye, and I'll let intuition guide me. The past behind me for a place I'd rather be. And if your heart is on a mountain and your soul is in the sea and your head is in the clouds, you could come with me. You could come with me. You could come with me. Come with me. Oh, with one eye on the future, and my spirit strong inside me. Oh, there's no wheel that's gonna grind me. Hey, there's no hammer mountains, fields and forests. I will plant my feet more firmly. I won't let anything deter me, 'cause the path is old and it's mine to take. See weld in a grain of sand, and a heaven in a wildflower. Hold infinity in the palm of your hand, and eternity in an hour. And if your heart is on a mountain and your soul is in the sea, and your head is in the clouds, you can come with me. 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 We'll go where horizons meet the sky. Whoa, 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 whoa.
And welcome back to Raconteurs News. Tuesday evening, I'm Andy Young, joined as always by Jason Holmes, and tonight's guest is amazing Lenon Honor, and we're talking about his new film, and it's quite an interesting discussion. This second half, we're gonna go into some of the dynamics of the effort and the commitment that it took to make this film. So, are you back, Lenon?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you fine, thanks. So, yeah, I know last time we spoke to you, it was quite a while ago, and you were well on the way to having the film made then, and it's took quite a while longer than you initially expected. So, can you run through some of the problems you had and the difficulties in making this?
Yes, and again, initially I thought it would take about 6 months. After we took on 12 interview guests, I figured a year, maybe a little bit over a year, but it actually has taken 2 years altogether.
Wow.
And one of the things I think when you're working on a project of this magnitude, there's also life to live. You know, there's life situations that occur.
Yeah.
Also, for the interview guests, there were interview guests who had situations taking place in their lives that needed to be addressed as well. So that's you know, it's a growing experience. The whole you figure 2 years of work, and I put in thousands and thousands of hours into this project. Mm-hmm. So it took a lot of time. But the other thing too is one of the great challenges was just financing the project. I didn't think that it would take this amount of money in order to finance a project of this magnitude. But again, the more that the project grew, the more money I had to spend. And we did crowdfunding campaigns. I'm very thankful to all of our crowdfunders. I think crowdfunding probably paid for about 70% of the project, maybe 60%, 60 to 70%. And then I made up for the difference personally. So that was a great challenge, you know, family of five and spending, you know, I think altogether our budget, the initial budget was, I think, $17,000. I think we ended up spending about close to $26,000 over the course of 2 years. So that was one of the major challenges, just being able to finance the project. And there were times where I was like, I don't know how I'm going to get this done. You know, I don't know how where's the money going to come to get this? You know, I had to buy a new computer, just as an example, just to have the proper equipment to edit. I had different equipment. Also, the soundtrack. I produced the soundtrack myself. I had to purchase equipment in order to produce the soundtrack. You know, paying the interview guests. Yesterday, we purchased DVDs. You know, that in and of itself, I think we ordered about 1,000 copies. I think it came out to like $1,600 US. So it's been expensive, you know, and there are oftentimes me and my colleague Saladin Assad, we joke about the fact that there are films that are being produced wherein the budget is $10 million, $20 million, $100 million. And we laugh about that because sometimes that type of money is being spent, and yet the end product is not something that is necessarily going to help humanity. And yet we've been able to put together a project for about $26,000, and it's really it's a decent work that is going to help people. Definitely going to help people. So I would say that was one of the major challenges was the financing of the film, and altogether it took about 2 years, 6 months up front in terms of research and research ongoing throughout the project. There was that was pre-production, then there was production, and then of course the post-production took a lot of time as well with the editing and so forth and so on. I should also mention that the version, Jason, that you viewed, that's the extended version. That's the deluxe version, as it were, the director's cut. I'll be cutting a theatrical version, which will be closer to an hour in length, shortly after we move to Utah. So there's still work to be done, and I still have to do more marketing and promotion. So there's going to be work that's going to be done going into the future. But I can say that honestly, it was all well worth it. All well worth it.
Yeah, sorry, I'd have to absolutely agree. The production values on it I thought were superb, and it never left you wanting any more. It sort of gave you everything that you wanted. I mean, I thought your guests were really good as well. Some quite. Was there some people that had been involved with NWA?
Yes. Well, Lonzo Williams, of course, he was involved with NWA even before they actually. In fact, he tells a story, and you remember the story because one of the it's interesting when you do the critical analysis and look at the lyrics, you realize that what NWA was about was not what their movie tried to portray them as. And that's the thing, propaganda. Jason, I've been doing this work a long time. I dealt a lot with propaganda and media mind control, and how things can be spun. You can spin a group that was about misogyny, promoting gang culture, rape culture, promoting the disrespect of women, promoting the murder of other African-American males. You can take a group that did that, and that was their major themes in their work, and then you can produce a film 20, 25 years later that paints them in the light that somehow these were social activists, And that's precisely what this is the mind control part of it, and that's what the film did. The Straight Outta Compton biopic, that's what it did. It painted NWA as if these were rebels, social commentators. These were people who were trying to change and fight against the system. And one of the primary ways that they did that was that they focused on, in the movie, in terms of the propaganda, was they focused on NWA's song, Fuck the Police, which is a coarse critique of law enforcement officers. And trust me, there is police brutality that's taking place here in the United States of America, and a lot of it is racially motivated. I've been not physically assaulted by police, but I have been harassed unnecessarily and unfairly quite a few times in my life. So I understand that this dynamic works, that it exists. But the thing is that in the movie, they simply focus on that song in order to promote the notion that NWA was fighting against the system and fighting against the oppression of African Americans. But when you do the critical analysis of their lyrics, what you find is that was a very small fraction of their work, and that in point of fact, their work predominantly, comparatively speaking, promoted the murder of African American males and females. In fact, the ratio of police brutality in NWA's lyrics to NWA committing brutality against African Americans is something like 36-1. So for every one instance of police brutality in their lyrics, NWA members commit physical violence against African Americans or commit brutality against African Americans 36 times. But what the movie did was it paints them in the opposite light. So this is the mind control aspect to this, that you can take something that was thoroughly degrading and a group that thoroughly degraded the African American experience, and then you can flip it through media propaganda and in the film and paint them in a totally different light. Now, the reason I'm bringing this up is because one of the stories, and I won't say too much because people should really take a look at the film, that song, Fuck the Police, is one of NWA's most popular songs, and it grew probably the most amount of attention out of all of their songs in their discography. But Alonzo Williams actually tells a story about how that song actually came about. It had nothing to do with police brutality that was taking place in Compton and in South Central Los Angeles and in Los Angeles, or in the country for that matter. It had nothing to do with that. It had more to do with an experience that NWA members had while they were engaged in criminal behavior. And I'm not going to say even more. I'm not even going to say any more than that. That's what I mean. Like Alonzo Williams' perspective was so valuable because he offers insight from being there on ground at the beginning when NWA was being formulated And so his perspective on NWA is totally different. It is more in line with what really truly they were about, as opposed to the propaganda that was issued in the film straight out of Compton.
And the ironic thing as well is that it's gangster rap, but none of them were even in gangs. Had never been in any gangs, had they?
The thing is, they had affiliations, yes, but I also had affiliations with gangbangers. I never gangbanged, but I have cousins, that were gangbangers. I had friends I have friends who committed drive-by shootings while they were in gangs and were locked up and are still locked up to this day. I have friends who were shot in drive-bys, and it was gang-related shootings. But that doesn't make me a gangster, right? And I did extensive research into NWA. The only person that I found information wherein it was stated that he had been in a gang was MC Ren. But once he became an NWA member, which was after NWA, much later, it was like halfway through NWA's run, he was not in the gang. So no one in NWA were gangsters at the time in which they were producing their lyrics. And most of their lyrics, the first 2 albums, were produced by Ice Cube. MC Ren did have more of a contribution after Ice Cube left, because he replaced Ice Cube in the group, so he did write some lyrics. But the point is this, that no one in NWA were actual gangsters, and yet they promoted gang culture. In fact, in their lyrics, they put themselves in the position of the so-called gangster and as in first person. So in other words, and this is where the concept of gangster blackface comes into play, because ultimately what they did was they put on the mask of the gangster in their music. It wasn't that they were actual gangsters, but they put on the mask and portrayed themselves as such because it was profitable. And if it was not profitable, then they would probably have portrayed themselves in a different light. But this goes to show you the degrees of manipulation. That here we have a group that's promoting gang culture, and in talking about how their group is a gang, it's controversial. And because it's controversial, it incites a lot of attention. And the more attention you garner, the more profitability you can. You transform attention into profit. You transform attention into income. And so because the intention was garnered, they kept pushing the envelope and pushing the envelope. And the thing that I illustrate inside the film is statistically, okay, I'm talking about actual scientific, you can verify this scientifically by actually doing the statistical analysis, that over time, the promotion of what I call premature black boy death, which is an aspect of gang culture wherein young African-American males are being murdered at alarming rates, this is being promoted more and more as you progress through their 4 albums. And I have it listed on the screen where you can see over time they promoted more and more. There's more instances of them playing themselves in blackface, painting themselves as these quote unquote gangsters out here shooting and killing other African-American males. Over time, from album 1 to album 4, you see this steady progression to where, and you get to the 4th album, and it's so far over the top compared to the first album. You recognize that what they did was they recognized that the profitability of murdering their own people within their lyrics was so great that the best thing that they can do was to capitalize on it. And how do you do that? You write more lyrics that actually promote the murder of your own people. Fascinating stuff. And again, this is scientific. It's statistics based upon word counts, verifiable. Anyone can actually verify this. I have all the statistics written out. And I can actually write a whole book on the statistical analysis. And I share probably about maybe 20% of the word count statistics in particular inside the film.
I did notice that when you were listing the murders and the accounts of African Americans killing African Americans, and all the different elements and the misogyny and the violence against women, I did notice that it got incrementally worse. So, like what you're saying is absolutely spot on. That obviously they made it was what was making money.
Yes, yes.
And that's quite sad, really. It's quite sad if you think about that. That the more and more violent that you get, and the more nasty you get, the more money you're going to make.
Yes, and you see the other thing that is that people would say, well, that's the case with most entertainment. And yes, the truth is that the films that are put out where there's explosions and there's people dying and there's this conflict and there's this war, or there's people fighting against even the superhero movies, But the difference is that so many young African American males, again, as we talked about earlier, who do not have fathers, they begin to self-identify. And I can't stress this enough. A lot of people don't understand this because they haven't had that experience. But when you grow up in a community wherein, to an extreme degree, men are not around, they're simply not around, and you have nothing to look up to. You don't have role models, and so you have to find them wherever you can. And in most cases for young African, well, I shouldn't say most, but in many cases for young African American males who are having that dynamic, and you have whole communities, so it's a concentration of young African American males. You have whole communities where you go through and you ask, where's your father? And you get 60%, 70%, 80%, and they say, I don't know. When's the last time you saw my father or saw your father? You know, some never have. So there is this situation that is taking place and been going on for quite a few generations now, where we have young African American males, myself included, where we have to try to find something to self-identify with. This perfectly normal and natural for a young man or young woman for that, or a young boy or young girl for that matter, to want to look up to a role model in terms of what does it mean to become a man, what does it mean to become a woman. It's perfectly normal, but the problem is that we were given such an abnormal representation of what it means to be a man. And so this is the difference, that the self-identification that takes place for a lot of young African American males is such that they begin to take on these archetypes and they begin to don the gangster blackface. You see, it's interesting because the rapper is misrepresenting themselves in the first place, and the representation is so egregious and so destructive, and yet that representation is what so many young African American males begin to aspire towards. And a lot of people don't understand how serious that is. That's a serious problem. That's why I'm very careful with my own sons, that I have to make sure that the modeling that I provide for them is something that it has to do with respect, integrity, and honor. Respect for life, respect for women. And not as a hypothetical, but as a living example. And so many young African American males, they don't see that living example, so they then go to whatever they can find. And so for many of us, the hip hop artist becomes the surrogate father. I would propose that hip hop itself has become the surrogate father for many young African American males. And I would take it a step further. Hip hop has become a god, a demigod, because it is perceived by many to be a sort of religion. That's how deep this goes. Fascinating stuff.
Absolutely. And also you touched on the futility and the complete waste of life that the East Coast, West Coast thing, the beef, as you call it, where that was. I mean, can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so in the extended version, we do deal with the East Coast, West Coast beef because, and for those y'all don't know, the East Coast, West Coast beef was a situation that took place in the hip hop community, wherein you had West Coast rappers who had beef or who had conflict with East Coast rappers. Interesting, right? And the East Coast rappers had conflict with the West Coast rap artists. And there was this exchange of rappers, going back and forth. We call it beefing here in the United States of America. And they would basically threaten each other or disrespect each other, and they would go back and forth. And this was going on for quite some time. And a lot of this comes out of the gang culture dynamic that was presented in NWA. That's why there's a correlation. You can see the mapping out of this conflict. You can see its predecessor within NWA and the conflict that NWA members had within that group. It really set the stage for the East Coast, West Coast beef. But and we explain this more inside the film. But the point is this, that the East Coast, West Coast beef, it too became a source of great interest by the larger society. And in other words, that it was so extremely profitable because people were waiting to hear this rapper talk about this other rapper and disrespect this other rapper. And in many cases, it wasn't just disrespecting them verbally. It was like physical threats. Like, I'm going to do this to you. I'm going to do this to your wife. Okay, on this level, this gets into this issue, this cultural norm within the African American community. And we talk about this in the film, too. We call it playing the dozens or capping or basing. A very interesting thing, like when we talk about the sociological implications of things like this, when we talk about playing the dozens and the disrespect, it's a game that we play within the African American community of disrespecting each other and young children. And you say the most egregious things, the most disrespectful things, and the person who either loses their temper and breaks down and cries, or who begins to lash out with physical violence, they are the loser. The other person is the winner. So this is called playing the dozens. It's a game, as it were, within the African American community. It plays itself out within hip hop. It's an essential part of hip hop. So this playing the dozens, going back and forth within the East Coast, West Coast beef, consumed a lot of attention, and it became so popular, and people began to tune in, and a lot of records were sold because of the East Coast, West Coast beef. Tragically, however, because the East Coast, West Coast beef is rooted in gang culture, and it's rooted in gang cultures because the West Coast artists, they had their hand signs, just like gangbangers, or, they have their Bloods have their hand sign, and the Crips have their hand sign. So the East Coast rappers had their hand sign, and they would say, East Side, they would call it out. This is gang culture. I was never a gang member, but I grew up around this. The West Coast rappers, they throw up their hand signs, West Side, West Coast, West Side. Okay, so it's gang culture. So in the real world, the gang members oftentimes fought over gang territory, but in the entertainment industry, these hip hop artists were fighting over hip hop territory. What's more popular? What's better? East Coast versus West Coast. Is West Coast better? Is East Coast? So this whole big thing that begins to take shape. Tragically, however, it ends in the death of one of the most popular, if not the most popular, West Coast artists of that time, and the death and murder of one of the most popular, if not the most popular, East Coast rapper of that time. And this would be Tupac Shakur and Biggie Smalls. So this is what I'm saying, that we can say that these lyrics in hip hop doesn't have an influence, but if it can lead to the murder and death of African American males and African American hip hop artists in particular, who at the time were the most popular hip hop artists during that time, then we also have to admit that it would also have an impact on the general population who listens to the music long enough and who are influenced over time. So that's what the East Coast, West Coast beef was all about. And the interview guests give some very candid stories about when they first heard of the death of Tupac and the death of Biggie Smalls. Very unfortunate, the loss of life unnecessarily. What's really sad about it was that though they were playing these roles, in particular Tupac, Tupac was not about that life. He was not about the thug life as he had tattooed on his chest. So he was not even about that. This was a young man who went to a performing arts school and was well cultured. He was actually an actor, in films. He took ballet lessons. I mean, we can go on, and people do the research. He was not the thug life, but he took on the persona when he got with Death Row Records. He began to mold and shape himself into something that he was not. And as a consequence, it influenced his mentality, it influenced his language, and ultimately his behavior, which ultimately led to his death and the death of Biggie Smalls.
Yeah, I seem to remember Tupac. He was an actor, wasn't he? In fact, he was one of his last films. I think it might have been his last film. Was called Gang Related, and it was about a gang-related murder, and which was quite ironic with what happened to him afterwards.
Yeah, well, he played in quite a few films. He's extremely talented, but the persona that he put on was nothing more than Gangster Blackface. He was trying to portray himself as something that he was not. But the thing is, as we talked about earlier, by that time, the entertainment industry and the music industry were so set on promoting that gangster archetype because it was so profitable. And Tupac Shakur really morphed into that, even though that's not who he really was. Tupac was not a gangbanger. He was not a thug. Okay, it's just a persona that he put on, and it's something that was profitable. But the thing is that oftentimes that persona turns into its own beast, and it begins to consume the person who puts on that persona. And that's precisely what happened with Tupac.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a sad world. Do you think that there's a certain amount of social engineering going on around this whole issue, particularly when we've got rappers that are being murdered, that are dying, and it seems to be tit for tat, and people, like you say, identifying themselves with the rappers themselves and sort of putting themselves into that shoes. Do you think there's a certain amount of social engineering going on with that, or do you think it's just something that's organic, that's just come out of this?
Well, again, the issue of what I call premature black boy death, wherein African American males are dying at alarming rates, but at a very early age, is something that's been going on. It was actually going on prior to NWA even coming onto the scene. So this is to say that the lyrics themselves are not necessarily indicative of social engineering, but it does have a social engineering effect. You see, this is to say that there are young African-American males who are not in situations wherein their life is threatened, but they may begin to believe that their life is being threatened on a daily basis because of the lyrics that they're listening to. Again, they begin to self-identify with the stories and the examples or the archetypes that are being presented in the lyrics. So in that sense, there is an ancillary, if you will, an ancillary social engineering that can take place and has taken place and continues to take place because of the types of lyrics that are being produced, and not just with NWA, but also since NWA came onto the scene. Again, the entertainment industry took took NWA as a model, and to this day continues to put forth artists who promote this type of programming, which is rooted in premature black boy death, the disrespect of African Americans, the murder of African Americans, misogyny, rape culture, and gang culture, so forth and so on. So this is to say that, again, all of what they talk about, NWA talks about in their lyrics, everything that we hear with more modern day quote unquote gangster rappers, it already exists within the certain African American communities. So it's not like they're actually creating it, but there is a secondary effect that it is having on African Americans who are not growing up in those situations, and it's also definitely having an effect in terms of the perceptions that other groups of people have about African Americans in general and African American males in particular.
Interesting. So, yeah, it is. Like you say, it turns into social engineering. It might not be directly a direct social engineering, but it does turn into a social engineering.
Yes.
Excellent. So, your film? Where can people get to watch it?
Yeah, so we have two sites right now. The first site is beyondgangsterblackface.com, and that's where you can actually pre-order the DVD. I should have copies of the DVD. I think I placed the order yesterday, and I think they said it's going to take about 16 days. So I should have copies, and as soon as I get copies in the mail, I'll start shipping out all of the pre-orders. And then once after we move to Utah, I'll start to get everything set up to start shipping out to all of our crowdfunders. So you can go to beyondgangsterblackface.com in order to purchase the DVD. Now, the DVD has not only the extended version of the film, which is an hour and 43 minutes. We call that the deluxe version. But it also has about an hour and, I want to say 20 minutes. Yeah, about an hour and 20 minutes of special features or bonus material. And that's information that we were unable to include in the actual film, but really good information from each one of the interview guests. So each one of the interview guests have a sequence of videos or recordings that we have, and we put them in sequence for each interview guest that you can actually listen to. So that's extra information to get into. That's on www.beyondgangsterblackface.com. And then we also have it streaming online right now, too. You can actually go to beyondgangsterblackface.vhx.tv. Okay, that's beyondgangsterblackface.vhx.tv. And you can actually rent the film for there's a 3-day rental, and then you can also purchase the film as a stream where you can come back and watch it as many times as you want to, for however long you want to. So that's, again, beyondgangsterblackface.com for the DVD, and beyondgangsterblackface.vhx.tv to watch it online.
Brilliant. So there's plenty of places, and I've watched it today, so I would recommend anybody get yourself onto these websites. And the DVD would probably be a good idea, because I think it's a film that you need to watch more than once. You know, it's a documentary that I think you need to watch more than once, because there's plenty of things in there that perhaps pass you by as you're watching it. So it's I can't recommend it highly enough. Production values are great, and of course it's. I did notice at the end that all the credits, it's Lenon Honor that's done all the everything, the little things. So you must have been very, very busy over the last couple of years.
Yes, and that's the thing. And there was a part of me, I didn't want to do that, but Saladin Asadi says, no, you need to put that on there, because people need to know the amount of work that you put in. In regular films, all of those credits plus more appear. It's just that they have so many more people working on a project that, it kind of fills in all of the gaps. But for me, that wasn't the case. I literally had to learn whole new skill sets. I had to learn new software. I had to learn new techniques in terms of editing. I can go on. I mean, I had to buy equipment just to produce the soundtrack. I didn't have the equipment, and I hadn't written music in quite some time. But I said, okay, I need to do this. Let me go ahead and invest in some equipment so that I can actually go ahead and produce the soundtrack for the documentary. So when the end credits roll, my name comes up a lot. But that's because that there was so much that I had to do, and I wasn't in a position financially to outsource a lot of things. Like, it would have been wonderful to be able to pay someone to do a lot of the things that I had to do, because the project we would have got done a lot sooner. But I had a limited budget, and so again, I had to work with what I have. That's another one of the important lessons too when we talk about managing, because we do in the film, we don't address NWA, we also in critical analysis. The critical analysis point is very important, especially for anyone who wishes to protect their subconscious mind from negative media programming. But also, if you have children, you want to keep your children protected from this stuff too. The film is also about life stories. It's about manhood and fatherhood. And we have people who talk about those things, and womanhood and pregnancy. There's a whole section on pregnancy that's very valuable for women in abortion, and women talking candidly about their experiences or their mother's experience of having abortions. We have a sequence in there about domestic violence, which is very powerful. And that was a completely organic situation that occurred while I was interviewing Sonia Barrett, who I have a great deal of respect for. And she opened up about, her experiences of being in a domestic violence relationship and having to exit, and how she had to have the courage. And she talked very candid. And the reason why we got on that topic is because one of the things that NWA promotes in their lyrics is the physical abuse of women. So there's so many different, even though we focus on NWA at a certain point in the film and on certain sections in the film, it's really about life experiences. It's about, the people's struggle to get beyond their childhood experiences and become something greater. And it's very inspirational in those regards. So this ought to say that in the end, the amount of work that went into getting this project done, and because there's so many different topics that we addressed, it was a lot, and I had to learn a lot. But this also means that the replayability factor, like there is a replayability factor, because there's so much that we do talk about, there's valuable information that people will have to go back and review. And learn even more, and that's one of the things that I really appreciate about the project. That there's some valuable information there, and some of it it's going to be necessary for people to go back and listen to over and over again in order to get.
Yeah, there were some guests that talked candidly about their experiences with domestic violence, including your own wife, I think, who she wasn't a victim, but did she have an aunt who was a victim of domestic violence?
Yes. She talked about an experience of her aunt, and you know what? When she told that story, because we have these triggers, and there's a lot of things that we've had experiences. All of us human beings, we have experiences that are kind of submerged within the subconscious mind that we don't think about, and they're traumatic and tragic experiences, and the subconscious mind takes it and submerges it so that we don't think about those things, over and over again. Because if we do think about those things over and over again, we'll be in an emotional wreck, But I remember when my wife was telling that story, it reminded me of an experience that I had with my own family, wherein my father chased my mother down, and I was in the car. Because you guys have to see the film, because it's really, really deep, the stories, like in the candor. But I do remember, because I grew up in a domestic violence household, and not only did my father brutalize my mother in extreme ways, I saw some heinous stuff, but he also brutalized all of his children. I'll talk a little bit about that inside the film. That's what I mean. It's like there's life stories and life lessons that we all need to share so that we can get beyond certain programming. And a lot of the programming comes from the media. A lot of the programming in gangster rap, it is about the abuse of women. But I do remember that experience of being in the car. We were in a van, and I think three of my siblings, it was three of us all together, and my mother was driving, and she was trying to get away from my father. My father was running down the street, and he ended up grabbing the side view mirror, almost ripped it off, and he's holding on to it while my mother is trying to get away. And I remember that it traumatized me. I was crying, and I cried. I remember I cried for the rest of the drive all the way to my aunt's house. And I remember, and I hadn't remembered this until just now. We actually went to our aunt's house, which was probably about 45 minutes away, and we stayed there for about 3 days. And I don't even know where my other siblings were at that time. It was real interesting when I think about it now. But this ought to say that there's so much in the film. It's not just about hip hop. It's not just about gangster rap. It's about life stories. There's avenues of healing that opens up for people as you view the film. And that's why the replayability and watching it over and over again, you're going to actually find more and more each time you go through the film.
Yes, I completely agree. So what's your next project going to be, Lenon?
Yes, well,
any ideas? Or are you
yes.
Having to end this one out?
Yes. So I would say, there's still a lot of work to be done with the documentary. I need to do a theatrical version, basically cutting down 1 hour and 43 minutes. I want to get it down to about, anywhere between 45 minutes to an hour. So I still need to do that. And of course, I'm going to continue with the promotion and marketing. And thank you for having me on your show too, because this is part of it. I appreciate you taking the time to have me here. I always enjoy talking with you. The next, there's two things. One thing I'm not going to tell you right now because my wife and I, we still need to talk about it, and it's going to be real interesting if we do decide to do this. But it's going to help people in terms of relationships. I'll just leave it at that. But one of the projects that I was working on before I started this film that I definitely want to get back to is my autobiography. And I think I wrote in my autobiography, I think I got up to the point where I met my wife. And so that's the age of 25. And then around that time, when I was writing when I got up to that point in my life in the actual book, that's when I was like, you know what, I want to do a documentary on NWA. And see, I thought it was going to take 6 months. But Jason, as you can see, it went and it took a year, and I thought I would be finished in a year, but it actually turned into 2 years. So I had to kind of shelve the other project in the meantime. So one of the next major projects that I'll be finishing up with is my autobiography, and I'll basically be sharing my life story from being someone who grew up in an abusive household and at a certain point a fatherless boy. That means at the age of 13, my father was no longer in my life and still continues to not be in my life. All the way up to becoming a man who was able to establish a positive relationship with his wife, 14 years together, 16 years altogether, 14 years of marriage, and then raising 5 beautiful children and doing it with a lot of love, a whole lot of love inside of our household. And so I think that's an important story to tell because it shows that, yeah, we can overcome regardless of our childhood situation, and we can actually do something and create something that's beautiful, not only for ourselves and our partners, but also for our children. That's a very important story to tell. So that's another one of the major projects that I'll be working on next.
I think what's just reminded me of is a very powerful part of the film when you were talking and you were saying that your dad was I don't know if he was beating on your mum or whatever, but because he had the same name as you perceived it sent to you like it sounded like your mum was calling for you rather than telling your father to stop. I thought that was really powerful.
Yes, and I didn't. There was a point when my editing process where I was in other film where I said I don't want to put that in there because it was hard for me to even listen. Even now, like when I get to that point, I'll try to pause it or I'll try to skip through it. That was probably one of the most traumatizing aspects of my childhood. My father has my name Lenon. And when he would beat my mother, she would call out to him and beg him to stop. And when I was a child, when she would say, "Stop, Lenon, please stop," I thought that she was talking to me. And so I remember I would be in the bed, and because oftentimes my father would tell us to go to bed or go lay down, and then he would start beating on my mother. And so I remember I would be in the bed, and I'll tell the story where we had these wooden posts on our beds, like most people do. They have these wooden posts, and I would bang my head up against that post over and over again because for whatever reason, it put me in that mindset where it was almost like I would go insane. Hearing my mother call out my name, begging my father to stop beating her. That was probably one of the most traumatizing aspects of my childhood, and I share that candidly inside the film. That's what I mean. Like the film is not just about NWA; it's about life stories and healing from childhood trauma. And it doesn't matter who you are; it doesn't matter where you live. Jason, you're on the other side of the world. Andy, you're on the other side of the world. We have all had traumatizing experiences throughout our lives, and in particular in our childhood. There are things that have happened to us. There are things that we have seen. There are things that we would never wish upon anyone else, and it's so important for us to have avenues to heal. And the film definitely presents some avenues for healing.
Absolutely, yeah, it completely does, yeah. And when you say it's not just about NWA and not just a critical analysis, I'd concur with that. It's got a lot of content in there, and the guests, the people that were doing the interviews, not that I know any of them, but they were really, really, really great people who did speak candidly and openly about their life experiences as well. So, yeah, I'd highly recommend that I'd highly recommend watching the film and getting a copy and watching it repeatedly, because then there are things that you're going to miss all the way through. So,
yes, absolutely.
Superb, Andy. You got out, sir.
I'll be honest, I'm a bit out of my depth with the NWA stuff because it is so far off my radar, and you know, I don't mind admitting it's kind of out of my sphere of knowledge. So I'm happy to sit back and let you two guys get on with it.
Well, Andy, just know that it's probably in your best interest for it to have been off of your radar. Because it has been on a lot of people's radar and a lot of people when I was growing up, and it was definitely damaging. You know, the other thing I want to say, Jason, is that there was a group on the East Coast who had screened the film, and I did a Skype session with them 2 days ago where we talked about the film, and I asked questions about you know, the people's perspective. I said, you know, what did you like about the film? What didn't you like? What do you think can be improved upon? Because when I make the theatrical cut for the film, I have to consider these things as well. So one of the people said I wanted more statistics, which was interesting. Actually, two people said that they wanted more stats because I like stats. I like, you know, numbers and doing that type of counting words, and I'm just into that kind of thing. But there are a lot of people who find that stuff to be cumbersome. One of the persons, they said, well, at first I thought that the film was going to be about blaming music for people's behavior. But he said the more that I watched it, I realized that it really wasn't about that. And that's the thing. I think that there is this, we tend to want to believe that somehow if a person is exposed to something that automatically it changes their behavior, that there is an instantaneous change in a person's mentality, instantaneous change in the person's language, instantaneous change in a person's behavior. But it really doesn't work that way. Now, it may happen, you know, rarely in a person's life. But in most cases, it's about the repetition, that if you are exposed to something over and over again, that it's going to impact you. As an example, as you listen to me, Jason and Andy, you probably say, this guy has an accent. Now, while I'm talking, I don't hear an accent because this is what I heard over and over and over again growing up. So this is how I talk. Now, when I hear you, Andy, and I hear you, Jason, I say, wow, these guys have an interesting accent. Yeah. But when you guys talk, you don't hear that. So why is it that we have these accents, and why is it that we don't even think about this, you know, as someone while we're speaking? Well, the reason why is because through repetition, we heard words being said a certain type of way. Mm-hmm. We heard words being repeated, phrases being said a certain type of way, and there is a tone that is being used at certain times, and there's a manner in which we present, and it's fascinating how this works. So this is to say that that through repetition, things do begin to impact people, because even in the way we speak is impacted through repetition. As a child, we heard our mother or our father talk a certain way, and we pick it up, and now we have that same type of accent, and we don't perceive it. But other people on the outside, they can perceive it. Well, the same thing applies to music lyrics, that if you listen to it enough over and over again, that it does begin to impact how you think, how you speak, and how you behave. So I think that the young man who had made mention of that was the key piece that I think he missed out on, that it's not that it happens instantaneously. It's not like a baby hears their mother talking and then begins to talk automatically like their mother. No, it takes time for that baby to begin to develop the vocabulary. And at a certain point, they start to talk, and the more they talk, they start to sound like Peppa Pig, because that's what they heard. And they heard their mother talking like Peppa Pig with that accent. And the people who talk in that accent, they won't realize it. But when I hear Peppa Pig, I can definitely hear the accent. Well, the same thing applies. It is an issue of repetition. The more something is repeated, the more of an impact it has on the listener or the reader or the consumer.
So what about your online lectures? Have you got any of them lined up? Because I used to sit and watch them. I used to sit and watch them live. I'd be up at like 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning and watching your online lectures. So have you got any plans for any more of those? I particularly enjoyed. In fact, it was the media manipulation one that really got me to your site, really.
Yes, and there's someone who emailed me about, and I replied to the email yesterday, but they emailed me about 5 days ago, and they asked the same question. They said, now that the film is done, are you going to start back with the radio show and the live streams where you do the media manipulation? And I really enjoyed that show. The thing is that right now the priority is to get my family moved, and then of course keep promoting the film, doing the marketing and the promotion. Once we get settled in, I can see doing something like that again. I really enjoyed the media manipulation show and looking at stories. As an example, in the beginning of the show, you brought up the bombing that just took place. Was it in Manchester? I think it was in Manchester.
That's right.
Yeah. So that would be like the type of topic that I would address inside of a show like media manipulation. So yeah, I would like to do it. It's just a matter of getting settled in. Once we get settled in, I'll reassess where things are at and look at my time commitments because I really enjoyed doing that show. And just doing radio in general, I enjoyed that. I did that for quite a number of years, and I look forward to being in a position to get back into doing that. I've always enjoyed that.
Yeah, I mean, I learned so much stuff. The one thing that that really sticks in my mind was, I think somebody at one of the airlines had tweeted a picture of a woman with a big an aeroplane, model aeroplane inside. Well, she was playing. She put it inside a vagina. I think
yes.
I remember that, and you plane problems.
Yes. So
always coming up to always. Is it May 2nd that they?
Yes. So let me explain. I talk about this in my book, The 911 Fear-Based Mind Control Program. Now, people who are listening, when you heard Jason say that, you're probably saying that sounds ridiculous. Yeah, it does. Absolutely, it sounds ridiculous. Plane problems and vaginas. What's going on here? But did you all know that was an actual story? So what I'm saying is in my book, 911 Fear-Based Mind Control Programming program, the 911 Fear-Based Mind Control Program is that mass media runs on these cycles. Just like there's particular shows that come on and they have season 1, and then there's a cycle that runs, and after season 1 is over with, there's a time period that the show doesn't come on, then you have to wait to season 2. Game of Thrones, as an example, we've been waiting on the next season of Game of Thrones. So this is to say that there is a script that is run throughout the year in terms of what types of shows are coming on and when. Well, the same thing applies to mass media and news media, that there's particular types of stories that are reported on more during particular times of year. And one of the primary stories that is reported on in and around September 11th is any story that has a relevance or a subconscious relevance to September 11th. So anything dealing with terrorism, bombs, ground zero, New York City, skyscrapers, plane problems is a huge one. Al-Qaeda, which has now turned into ISIS somehow. Anything that has to do with September 11th, Osama bin Laden becomes back onto the scene. Okay, they begin to report on stories, and it happens every single year. Well, one of the stories that comes out is propaganda about potential terror threats, and they call them credible but unconfirmed terror threats. How can something be credible and unconfirmed at the same time? Okay, this is mind control. These are types of topics we talked about in the show Transcending Media Manipulation. I really enjoyed this topic. So one of the cyclical timelines, the types of stories that come out is cyclical. It's a timeline. 6 weeks leading up to September 11th, you get these types of stories in the news, and they begin to build up, and so that by the time you get to September 11th, you see that it's all over the news. Stories about potential terror threats, Al-Qaeda, Osama bin Laden, plane problems, so forth and so on. But there's also another cycle that's associated with September 11th, and that is the 4 weeks leading up to May 2nd. And the reason why is because that is the day of the supposed assassination of Osama bin Laden. SEAL Team 6 goes in and assassinates Osama bin Laden, even though there's absolutely no evidence or proof of this. None whatsoever. Again, critical thinking, where's the evidence and proof? None was actually manifested, and yet the world has been led to believe that SEAL Team 6 went in and assassinated Osama bin Laden without any evidence or proof. So what happens is that in the weeks leading up to May 2nd, you start to get stories in the news about plane problems, plane crashes, Osama bin Laden, Al-Qaeda, now it's ISIS, so forth and so on. So it happens every single year, and you guys can verify it simply by watching, monitoring media, and you'll start to see this buildup of stories in the news. One of the stories that was being presented, and we talked about this in Transcending Media Manipulation, was stories about potential terror threats with people who created body cavity bombs.
Vagina bombs. Yeah.
Vagina bombs, or this could also be anus bombs. There was a story that came out about these liquid bombs that women terrorists would actually implant into their breasts. So, breast augmentation, well, instead of having, breast augmentation, you would actually put bombs in your breast. These were stories that were being reported on in the news, and we asked the question why. Well, one of the reasons why is that in order to fulfill the quota for that particular storyline, especially within the 6 weeks leading up to September 11th, and also the 4 weeks leading up to May 2nd, stories have to be concocted to fit the programming cycle. In other words, you have to come up with something. So some of the stories become so outlandish, ember bombs, and stories about snakes on planes. That's the plane problems, and cracks on planes. These are stories actually that are being reported on during these time periods in order to fulfill the quota of this type of media propaganda that takes place within the 6 weeks leading up to September 11th every single year since September 11, 2001, and within the 4 weeks leading up to May 2nd, ever since the supposed assassination of Osama bin Laden. It all sounds ridiculous. The stories sound ridiculous, but these stories are actually reported on in the news.
And as an example of that, in the 4 weeks leading up to May 2nd this year, we had a lot of people that were getting thrown off planes.
Yes.
There were stories about people that were getting forcibly removed from planes, even though they bought a ticket and they, they were legitimately there just to make room for somebody else. So that's an example, yeah.
Yes, and the thing is that plane problems happen all the time. They're happening all the time. But the point is that it is during that time period, the 4 weeks leading up to May 2nd and the 6 weeks leading up to September 11th of every single year, and those stories are reported on even more. And in some cases, stories are simply created out of thin air in order to fulfill the quota, right, of the fear mongering associated with Osama bin Laden, associated with Al Qaeda, potential terror threats, credible but unconfirmed terror threats. Plane problems is a huge one, and the reason why plane problems is relevant too, just to kind of connect this with September 11th, is because the greatest plane problem story in human history happens to be September 11, 2001. We had these planes supposedly crash into the Twin Towers in New York City. Okay, that's the greatest planes problem story ever told. And so therefore, in and around that time, stories are told about plane problems because it triggers the trauma of September 11th and what took place on that day. I outline all this inside my book. In fact, Jason, you know this to be the case. I actually have a chart of the cyclical timeline programming inside the book that you can actually follow throughout the year, not just with September 11th, but with any traumatizing story that has taken place more recently, going all the way back to even, I think I have on there the sinking of the Titanic. That's also used on the anniversary. In particular, and this is the last point, that I kind of feel like I'm belaboring the point. What tends to happen is that on the 1 year anniversary, the 5, the 10, the 25, and the 50-year anniversary, that's when the stories are reported on in extreme ways based upon a traumatizing event. So this is to say that September 11th, when we get to the 25-year anniversary, mass media is going to take it to a whole other level in terms of the media programming, talking about September 11, 2001, plane problems, Al Qaeda, ISIS. By that time, it may be morphed into some other terrorist group, so forth and so on. The 50-year anniversary, well, the same thing applies to any traumatizing event that has taken place in recent history.
Yeah, if I remember rightly, you've got a chart in the book, but you've also I got a bookmark as well, which had got the timeline running across it. I think so anyway. I mean, you might be able to correct me if I'm wrong, but like I said, the book I lent to somebody and I can't remember.
Well, that's good. It's circulating. Yes.
Yeah, excellent book. The 911 Fear-Based Mind Control Program by Lenon Honor. Go get yourself off to lenonhonor.com. Go onto his website and you'll be able to. Have you still got copies left of that?
Yes, and it's available in paperback, but there's also available as a PDF download. That's one of my favorite books, and I think that's the most important book when it comes to media programming, because we outline not only the cycle, but also what a person can do in order to protect their subconscious mind. Because when I talked about trauma, September 11th, in terms of globally, it was the most traumatizing event in human history. And I talk about this in the book, at no point in human history have we had such a catastrophic event take place wherein the whole world could actually tune in real time. That was the first time in human history because of where technology was at. And so therefore, the trauma of that event is global and continues to be global. And a lot of that trauma is submerged within the subconscious mind. We talked about the subconscious mind, and I talk about this in the book too, in terms of how it functions when we deal with trauma as human beings. And so if the trauma goes unhealed and if it's simply submerged within the subconscious mind, then what mass media can do is to issue stories that trigger that trauma. And when that trauma, about stories about Al Qaeda, again, terror threats, the bombing in Manchester triggers, terror threats. Okay, September 11th, the subconscious mind makes these associations and the trauma is being triggered from September 11th as well. What happens is that over time, you can manipulate a person by triggering their trauma, because if you trigger their trauma, it puts a person back into a state of fear, like a lot of people right now are fearful because of the Manchester bombing that took place. And out of this fear comes forth the externalization of power. People want someone to come and save them, and oftentimes it's the government needs to come and save them. And that's how you're able to maintain control over massive amounts of people. You trigger their trauma, or you traumatize them. You have them externalize. You put them in a state of fear, and they begin to externalize power, and then you control them indefinitely. And the trauma of September 11th has been used as a psychological tool of warfare since September 11th to trigger trauma in the global population to keep people in a state of perpetual fear and to have people externalize their power. So that's really what that book is about. It's a really important book for people to check out.
It is an important book, and I'd also recommend people go to your YouTube site and have a look at the Transcending Media Manipulation series that you did, because I know that there's hours and hours and hours on there. I'd sat and watched it all, and it was it's something that opened my eyes up completely, and it was also something that I'd never even really thought of before. So thanks for that. Thank you.
Oh, my pleasure.
I recommend people go to LenonHonor.com, and you'll be able to find all at LenonHonor.com or onto your YouTube site. You've got a YouTube site, haven't you?
Yes. Lenon Honor. Yeah, Lenon Honor Films is the YouTube type, but you can just type in Lenon Honor, and we have a whole lot of content that's up there.
Well, fantastic. I think we're just about out of time. Andy's going to talk then, but he's
yeah, go on.
Might be muted, unusually.
Yes, that's it. I mean, I'm surprised we didn't spend a weekend you saying, Andy, your mic's muted, but at least we were sat in the same room so you could hear what I was saying. Yeah, thanks, Lenon. Tonight has been a real eye-opener. I've learned a lot more about your film, and I will watch it as soon as I get a chance to. Thanks, everyone, for listening. It's been a fascinating show, and I hope you'll spread the link around so that all your friends get to listen it. I did get one comment saying it's a shame there's not so many listening to this, because everybody needs to hear this, and I'll agree on that. Thanks for listening, everyone, tonight. We'll be back the same time next week. Not sure who the guest's going to be just yet, but we're going to hand you over now. It should be not Dr. Tamara with Happy Hour, but I understand she's drowned her phone in balsamic vinegar, which I think is a bit posh for us here, but usually I just drop mine down the toilet, but hey. So I'm not sure what's happening afterwards. I'm sure there'll be something in its place. So thanks for listening, folks. We're going to play out with a track from Heath to West, A Flag Day Reborn, and we'll see you next week. Thanks, Lenon, and thanks, Jason. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Nightingales, not enough Robin Hoods. Too many halos, not enough heroes coming up with the goods. So you thought you'd like to change the world, decided to stage a jumble sale. Decided to stage a jumble sale for the poor, for the poor. It's a waste of time if you know what they mean. Try shaking your box in front of the queen, 'cause her purse is fat and bursting in the seams. It's a waste of time if you know what they mean. Too many hands and they mean. Try shaking your box in front of the queen, 'cause her purse is fat and bursting at the seams. It's a waste of time if you know what